Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show, or the podcast version thereof. I am Benjamin Dixon, and it is Monday, September 11, 2017. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't start today by remembering. Of course, I mean, I don't know. When is a good time? Oh, God, I'm about to go down the wrong path today. Oh, goodness. Somebody stop me. When is a good time for us to not have to commemorate this every single year? I know, never forget. I know. And don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this just to be like coy or callous or try to be funny or cute. I woke up this morning, went to work, and everybody wanted me to do a video on 9/11, and I just didn't really have it in me to do. Now, I did one. And, you know, I think it was a meaningful video, but I don't know, man. 9/11 takes a lot out of me, and I don't like to have to think about it every single year. It's like clockwork. Somewhere around September 1st, August 30th or 28th or something like that, all of a sudden I get this urge to just sit on YouTube and watch all of the saddest videos ever recorded about 9/11. And I just spiral down a deep, dark hole of depression around 9/11. And so for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, because, you know, 9/11 has made up almost as much of my life as before 9/11. 9/11 for me happened when I was 21. I'm 37. So all of my adult life, every bit of my adult life has been shaped by 9/11. And so anytime it's like, I subconsciously do it. And I'm not saying this to make me seem important or special or anything like that. I'm quite sure there are literally millions of people across the country who have the same phenomenon, where as we get closer to 9/11, we inadvertently end up in a spiral on YouTube and social media, particularly YouTube, watching videos related to 9/11 and just get sucked into this deep, dark, sad place, because what happened to us was this deep, dark, sad event. And so I am almost at the point this morning where I was like, I just don't even want to talk about 9/11 anymore. I don't want to talk about it. I can't imagine people who lost loved ones on 9/11, how they are dealing with it, coping with it, or whether or not they even want to remember it. But I think, as I'm sure people have gotten to where I am, many of you may have gotten to where I am long ago. You may have gotten to the point where you just would rather not even talk about it, for many reasons, including the ones that I listed. So it's not out of disrespect for America or for the people who have were killed, or the first responders. It's just, sometimes it's just too much, man. Too much. And so, yeah, that's it. So anyway, but out of due diligence and out of respect, you know, we pause and remember all the people who were lost. All the people who were lost. You know, all the people who... It's difficult to think about all the people who were lost and not think about why they were lost. That's the difficult thing. I'm, like many of you, I'm at the phase where I don't want to talk about 9/11 without talking about all of the things that led to 9/11. Jeremiah Wright, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, Obama's preacher, was ahead of his time, because he was talking about the issues that most of us are just now talking about, or most of us, America as a whole, the body politic, is just now getting around to the fact that we're able to discuss 9/11 in the sense of blowback, that it was something that we did to ourselves. It was the result of America being in bed with Saudi Arabia, and in bed with particularly Saudi Arabia's spread of Salafism and particularly Wahhabism across the world. Saudi Arabia actively spreads the most fundamentalist version of Islam. And not only just spread it ideologically, but financially backs it being spread across the globe. And the United States being in bed with Saudi Arabia for the purposes of oil has always supported, we funded the terrorist ideology behind Al-Qaeda. We're funding the terrorist ideology behind ISIS. We funded and supported Osama bin Laden, in the fight against in Afghanistan against Russia. We funded him. We created him. We gave him a platform. We have news articles of Osama bin Laden being beloved by the United States. We gave him his training. The CIA trained him, funded him, backed him, helped him win and become and emerge victorious. And Osama bin Laden is a son of Saudi Arabia, as a son of Wahhabism, or was, because we killed his ass. But you can't talk. I can't talk about it these days without talking about all that is connected to 9/11 and the fact that we did this to ourselves, and particularly with Osama bin Laden in the 1980 war against between the invasion of Russia of Afghanistan. Afghanistan was an American agenda to push back against communism. And where I hate to simplify things, the fact of the matter is that we funded Osama bin Laden to push back against Russia because we wanted to block the spread of communism. It's really that simple. America fears communism more than anything else. This is why, and we've discussed this, but this is why when you become an American citizen, you have to disavow any ties to communism. Not to fascism, but to communism. Because fascism is not a threat against capitalism. Communism is. Fascism actually embraces capitalism rather, in the form of corporatism. Fascism and capitalism go hand in hand, like a glove, like O.J. Simpson's glove. Actually, better than O.J. Simpson's glove. I digress. But communism is a direct threat to our economic system of choice, ostensibly free markets, not really free markets, but we call it free markets. And so we funded, in the 80s, we funded Osama bin Laden. We trained him. We gave him the intelligence. We made him America's darling, and then he became America's enemy. Subsequently leading or being the mastermind or the figurehead behind 9/11. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is actually the mastermind of 9/11. And now we're finding out today that Saudi Arabia potentially was so complicit in 9/11 that they funded a dry run of the attack with two international students, or two Saudi Arabian nationals who were posing as students on a flight from Phoenix to Washington. And the purpose of that, this was 2 years before the 9/11 attacks, 1999. And they did it in order to serve as a dry run for the actual attacks on 9/11. 28 pages that were left out of the 9/11 Commission report implicated not only the Saudi government, but not only Saudi Arabia in general, but also the Saudi royal family in the attacks on 9/11. So I can't talk about 9/11 without talking about Osama bin Laden, yes, but also talking about this cozy relationship that the United States still has with Saudi Arabia, despite the complicitness of Saudi Arabia, if not co-conspirators, but they were complicit in 9/11. Can't talk about it. So I can't talk about 9/11, and I think, and again, this is not me being anything special whatsoever. I think right now, any average American who's paid attention at all should be incapable of discussing 9/11 without discussing the underlying factors that led to 9/11 and the fact that we are still in love and in bed with the nation from which 15 of the hijackers came. I mean, think about that. We didn't bomb Saudi Arabia. We didn't drone Saudi Arabia. We didn't invade and occupy Saudi Arabia. Shit, we didn't even sanction Saudi Arabia. But they funded, trained, and gave birth to the people who committed the greatest act of war and terror against the United States since Pearl Harbor. sorry, I grow weary of talking about 9/11 because we're not really talking. It becomes a ritualistic exercise in commemorating the fallen. And whereas I fully embrace the memories of the fallen, I also think that we should honor them by discussing the real causes and root of the attacks on 9/11. There's no need to go into conspiracy theories about, American government blowing, explosive charges blowing and blowing the Twin Towers down, and the temperature at which jet fuel ignites, or the temperature at which the steel would have melted, and the conspiracy theories around that. There's no need, because there is a very realistic theory underneath all of this, which is far more nefarious than merely a false flag. But the fact that the United States knows full and damn well the complicitness of Saudi Arabia, but yet every subsequent president, including Bush, has still wrapped their arms around the Saudi government, has kneeled before the Saudi government, has danced with the Saudi government, with the Prince of Saudi Arabia, with the House of Saud. Here's the other, I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to shift gears from being an American who came to terms with America being in bed with the nation most complicit with our greatest attack since Pearl Harbor. I'm going to shift gears from being that person who can't really talk about 9/11 and shift gears to, holy shit, what kind of Machiavellian mentality goes into the calculus of U.S. operatives and the U.S. government such that we know that these people want to kill us, but we're going to stay in bed with them. And we're still going to give them a wink, wink, and a nod, nod. We're going to allow them to plan terrorist attacks against us and fund terrorist attacks against us, but we're going to list Iran as on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, but not Saudi Arabia. What is it? What type of not draconian, but what type of, Machiavellian? I don't want to keep using it, but think about the type of person. Let's anthropomorphize America. Let's talk about America as an individual, as if it was a living, breathing individual, right? Because for all intents and purposes, the United States of America has a living, breathing agenda that transcends any political affiliation, and it does a certain number of things consistently across all administrations. So it's reasonable for us to discuss the United States as if it was a corporation, as if it was a people, my friend, to quote Mitt Romney. It's reasonable to discuss it as though it has a life of its own and makes its own decisions, because it has the ability to break and bend even people of the most inspirational character of Barack Obama and break them into the same mold as George W. Bush. It has the ability to take a person as oafish and outsider-ish as Donald Trump and break him into the same mold, such that the very first trip that he takes abroad is not to Canada, not to Mexico, but to Saudi Arabia for him to bend over for the Saudi prince. So America, if we anthropomorphize it, is a son of a bitch. It is one of the most vicious people we've ever seen, such that it breaks everyone into its mold. And we have to pause for a second and say, what type of person is this that can look at someone who literally stabs it in the back? Or rather, I should say figuratively, stabs it in the back on 9/11, and yet, instead of removing the knife from our back, we push it in even deeper, and we push it in deeper so that we can embrace the nation that stabbed us. And not to wax so philosophical or in any vain attempt of being poetic, but good Lord, man. Think about it. What policies are so important that we don't have a visceral reaction and attack the people who actually were most complicit? What ties do we have with Saudi Arabia such that it supersedes their attack on us? Saudi Arabia is more responsible for 9/11 by magnitudes of order than Iraq would ever be. And yet we destroyed Iraq. Never mind the fact that we had the plans on the books before we went in. Never mind it was something that the neoconservatives in America wanted to do. But I mean, if we're talking about pure retribution and reciprocity, I mean, surely America should recognize its own patriotism. Surely America should recognize its own appeal towards nationalism and self-pride and self-preservation, such that a nation that attacks it, even if we have mutual interests, surely we should be able to turn to that nation and say, you're next, or say, we're going to get revenge, or we will avenge the lives of the fallen. But did we do that? No. Every single president from Bush on is protecting Saudi Arabia. And I'm not advocating for us to go to war with Saudi Arabia. I'm just questioning why we protect Saudi Arabia and yet go to war with nations that had nothing to do with 9/11. Of course, I know the answer, guys, and I'm just slowly but surely working my way there. But just think about it, man. What kind of... Of course, the underlying theme is oil. Of course, the underlying theme is how the House of Saud is non-threatening to capitalism and the leading supplier, one of the leading suppliers of our oil. I mean, that is the simple and the simplistic answer. That's why we would turn a blind eye to the tragedy that is Yemen, to the civil war between the Houthi rebels, backed by Iran, and the government backed by Saudi Arabia. That's why we would look at it and turn a blind eye to one of the largest outbreaks of cholera, to one of the largest instances of starvation, almost to the point of genocide in Yemen. But we would allow, and the only thing that trumped, for lack of a better phrase, our relationship with Saudi Arabia was the Iranian nuclear deal, which pissed off Saudi Arabia. That is the only thing that I believe that we've done that comes at the top of my head, and I'm going completely from memory. So any Middle Eastern, North African nation scholar who wants to correct me, feel free. But that's the only thing that I can think of that we've done that betrayed Saudi Arabia. And yet this is the nation most complicit with our darkest hour in this generation. I remember exactly where I was. 21 years old, young guy, young enough to have braids in my head, cornrows to be exact. And I was sitting in real estate school. Like I said, I've done a whole lot in my lifetime. I'm on regeneration, at least regeneration number 9 for anyone who knows Doctor Who. I'm at least on number 9. But in 2001, I was 21 years old. I was a real estate agent or trainee. I had just passed the Florida real estate exam, and I was in Century 21 training to become a real estate agent. And the secretary of our brokerage, our real estate brokerage, came in screaming and crying. They bombed the Twin Towers, and everyone just jumped up immediately and looked at the televisions. And by the time we saw it, the towers had already fallen. I mean, we had been in class all morning, and the towers had already fallen. And it was too much for me to process. Hell, again, I'm speaking of this as if it was a personal experience, because it was. It was a collective experience, but it was a personal experience, right? And so as I speak of this as a personal experience, I kind of feel a little, skittish, because I don't want to make it seem like it's about me. But realistically, it was about each and every one of us and our own individual experiences that created the collective calamity that was 9/11. So forgive me if I'm speaking of it as if it was about me, but in that moment, I was by myself. I don't remember any of the people who were in my class, except the one pretty girl. I do remember her. But besides her, I really don't remember anybody else that was there, except the woman who came in and alerted us. I don't remember. There was this class of 21 people. I don't remember anybody. I don't remember what the office looks like. It was so long ago. I just remember looking up at the television and seeing the Twin Towers falling and feeling a sense of dread, feeling a sense of fear, but feeling a sense of patriotism. One of the emotions that I remembered right away, which historically is going to go down as the wrong emotion, but I'm man enough to admit it, was that my first thought was they've got the right one in the White House, right? Because I knew that cowboy in the White House was going to blow some shit up. And when you initially see what happened on 9/11, you want a revenge. You know, the next thing I remember was driving over to an arcade. You guys remember video arcades in the malls? Century 21 was right across the street from a mall. And, you know, because I really couldn't process it, the day was over. We weren't going to learn anything else. I drove over to the arcade and played Marvel vs. Capcom. I remember that in detail. But on my way over, people were sitting in their trucks on the side of the road waving the American flag. And I remember this overwhelming sense of pride and nationalism and rallying around the flag, right? And, you know, we could talk about all the reasons that was problematic, but for a 21-year-old kid who really didn't know much about foreign policy at the time, didn't really know much about anything except the fact that we were hurt, those things gave me comfort. It actually gave me comfort to know that we had a person in the White House who was going to blow the shit out of somebody. I didn't know who, because we didn't know who did it, but I knew somebody was going to pay the price. And unfortunately, we're 16 years into the wrong decision. Thank God I wasn't in Congress. Thank God I wasn't a senator, because I'm quite sure I would have voted for the resolution, the authorization of use of military force in Iraq, because I would have just been emotional. Like, I mean, maybe I would have bumped into, man, it would have been great if I could have, Barbara Lee. I would have been great if I could have remembered her name at the tip of my tongue, but that was fast enough, right? Barbara Lee. It would have been great if I could have ran into Barbara Lee and have her school me. But odds are, you know, being a young kid, not really experienced with the world, you know, I would have been okay. Hey, Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. Let's go. Most people will say that they wouldn't have done it, but let's just be real, man. Let's just be real. Most of us are just getting woke as a result of what happened in Iraq. But I digress. So I remember in a very personal way, because it was a lot for me to process as a 21-year-old kid. And I say kid because I'm looking at it from this vantage point. Most people treat 21-year-olds as adults. Man, we don't. 21-year-olds, I'm sorry, kids, but y'all don't know nothing, man. I'm sorry, you know, and this is not any attempt to insult you, but it's an attempt to help you understand. You learn so much more after you turn 21, like between the ages of 21 and 37. Shit, I'm quite sure there's somebody 60 listening to me who's like, Ben's got a little ways longer to go. He's almost there. His show is good, but give him about 15 more years, and that boy will really know something. But he don't know nothing at 37. Just like I don't think 21-year-olds know anything. Not for real. Because I had to go back to the arcade and I was like, man, this is dope. Deep. But the other problem that was problematic was that I could not get up with my brother. My brother Scott. He was in New York. He was in New York on a trip doing IT services in Manhattan. So I knew he was close. But I had no idea how close he was until we finally got up with him. It was a full day before we got up with him. And when he told us what happened, it was unbelievable, except for the fact that he had photos, and we can see photos from his digital camera at the time. He had photos of the Twin Towers being hit. He was that close. He had photos of him hiding underneath a car when the buildings collapsed. He was that close. He had photos of him walking across the bridge into New Jersey, because that's how, that's the only way they could get away. And he was taken in. He and his coworkers were taken in by strangers. Here's something I'm going to say that may not fit the motif of the progressive movement. But I'm going to say this, man. Nationalism has its place. It has more places where it's taken advantage of for the detriment of human society. Yes. I will preface it with that. I have no problem with that disclaimer because that is true. But it has its place because, when we're wounded, all we have is each other. I mean, ultimately, that's a humanity thing. If humanity is wounded, we'll see the same type of connectivity across all nationalities. But thankfully, we don't have a human experience that is so detrimental that it forces us into embracing the human bonds that connect us. But we do have those wounds in the United States. And I know, folks, I do know that we killed 1 million Iraqis, and Afghans, Afghanis. It slips my mind right now. Isn't it a shame that, man, my show could wax so poetical? Only on the Benjamin Dixon show could I go from being poetic to being complete buffoon. Oh, man. Oh, goodness. So anyway, bring it back in. I do know the atrocities done in the name of 9/11. So I'm not glorifying anything that happened after 9/11 because we have to discuss exactly how we got here. But I think it's still something that we as progressives miss out. There's a lot of progressives who hate America. I know them. I like you guys. You're my friends. Some of you might just be the, friends. Let's just say it like that. I was going to get myself in trouble. But I'm friends with all of you because our vantage point is pretty much the same. We see the problems of America. And some people see the problems of America and despise America. I see the problems of America and see opportunities or the necessity for us to make America better. And, some of us see the promise of our founding fathers and see a bunch of bullshit from a bunch of white supremacists who were the scum of the earth. I see the promises of America and I see white supremacists who were the scum of the earth, but I still see the potentiality. Is that even a word? Oh my goodness, it's not a word. I see those white supremacists and I see a promise that is bigger than them. That their bullshit does not have the right to destroy the promises that were bigger than them. Thomas Jefferson's raping of Sally Hemings does not he's not the vision of America. No. Hang on. I want to correct that. The vision of all people being created equal is bigger than the evil white supremacy of our founding fathers. Because we have to pursue that. We have to pursue that. That's what we're fighting for. And so whereas our country was founded on all of these by all these problematic men, white men, the fact of the matter is this thing that they promised that if they realized would be extended to black people and people of color, they may never have promised it, or they may have qualified it and said all white men are created equal, but they didn't. Maybe they weren't smart enough to realize how big their promise was, but their promise was so big that it was bigger than they are. And to that end, whereas I see America as a great problem on the international stage, some people see America as the only problem on the international stage. Whatever, we can argue about the details of that, but I simply see this potential for equality in across humanity that can be achieved. And so whereas some of my friends, my progressive friends, we both can diagnose. So here it is. Here's the best example. Me and Marx. I have a friend named Karl Marx. I read his book. I read a lot of his writings beyond just the Communist Manifesto, but I think the Communist Manifesto was a decent place to describe my friend Karl Marx, whereas I 100% agree with his diagnosis. of the problem with capitalism, and here I'm going to use America as a proxy for capitalism. I 100% or capitalism as a proxy for America, but I 100% agree with his diagnosis of the problem of America, capitalism, but I disagree with his policy recommendations and solution. Right? That's fair, right? And so I see a lot of my progressive friends who hate America. I see a lot of you the same way. We can agree on the problem that is America. That's why we probably still hang out. That's probably why you guys haven't written me off and I haven't written you guys off, right? I have some extreme leftist friends who diagnose the problems of America as good as I do, and they appreciate my diagnoses of the problems in America, but our approach to America is totally different. I don't hate America. I don't hate America. I will never revel in pain felt by America, even in light of the fact of the pain that America caused. I might be guilty of special pleading. We can argue that. We can debate that. Holy shit, my wife just walked in here and scared the holy bejesus out of me. Babe, what you looking for? I'm in the middle of a rant and I'm like, only gotten 3 regenerations left. You can't be scaring me like that. She needed a damn charger. Love you, babe. You cannot come in the studio when I'm doing this. Only on the Benjamin Dixon Show. Okay, listen, back full circle. Okay. Me and my progressive friends who look at America and look at nationalism and they look at patriotism and they look at it through the most negative lens because of the baggage that is America, the baggage of our foreign policy, the blowback, their dissection of what American nationalism is, what capitalism does on the global scene, particularly in the global South. They have a diagnosis that leads them to despise America. And I'm not calling them out on their hatred of America, right? I'm not calling them out. I'm not trying to attack them. I'm not going to say that they're bad people by any means, because I have the same diagnosis, but I have a different view of America. And you have to understand my vantage point. A lot of my life has been shaped by a time before 9/11, before the Iraq War, and then grappling with the Iraq War and grappling with the fact that, wow, we started from being the people who were hurt to becoming the people who did the hurting. And then you go one step deeper and realize, well, the reason we were hurt was because our policies in the 80s with Osama bin Laden and Afghanistan and our attempt to use Wahhabism to push back against communism, because above all else, we're going to protect capitalism, right? And you start growing and you start maturing, but yet I'm not at the point where I'm ready to say I hate America. I don't believe I will ever get to the point where I'm going to hate America. You know why? Because when my brother was trapped in New Jersey, barely getting away from the Twin Towers falling, there was another family who opened up their doors on the mere fact that we were all Americans. Opened up their doors and let my brother in and took care of my brother. That's why. Because we have a common bond and a common responsibility and a common sin. I'm not talking about America's original sin. We'll talk about that on another show, right? We have a common sin that we all share, and that is America's foreign policy. That no matter if we're leftists who hate America or if we're neoconservatives who are forwarding this terrible foreign policy, we share the common sin in that we all fund it through our taxes. We're all complicit with it by not being willing to go to jail in order to refuse to pay those taxes. And we will all be held responsible for it by any foreign invader who wants to destroy America because of our foreign policy. So we all share in that common sin. Misery loves company. We're all there. But ultimately, it's really simple, man. It's really simple. There was a family in New Jersey who opened up their doors and took my brother in, allowed him to. They fed him. They cleaned him. They let him shower in their home. He was able to shower off the dirt from the Twin Towers. right? He was covered in smoke just like every other first responder because he was so close. When the towers fell, he had to hide underneath a car. And here I am having to cope with it as a grown man. I know I keep saying kid, but I know I was a grown man, but I couldn't really process it. My brother was in New York. And because of that, I can't even think about the people who actually lost people, man. People who know that their family member jumped because the temperature and they would rather jump than to burn alive. People who received phone calls. I can't imagine because I can't even process the fact that my brother was there. I couldn't process at the time the fact that my brother was there. And I know each and every one of you have a story that's similar to this. All of that to say, this is why I don't know if I want to talk about 9/11 anymore. Because it's a collision of my patriotism with my awareness of how we got there. It's a collision between a deep emotional connection to my family and that family who took care of my brother for no other reason than we were all Americans. And as cliche as that sound, like seriously, what other reason? That we were all humans? No, that's not necessarily true because, if it had been a Saudi Arabia family or the Saudi prince, the royal family, they were celebrating. Why would they not be celebrating when they were the most complicit? So it's like a collision of thoughts and emotions and a lot of things from, I want to say childhood, but from an emotionally immature stage of my life or an emotionally weak moment in my life that I just wasn't prepared for, that we weren't as a society prepared for. And we collectively have become more aware since then. We collectively have contributed to the demise of millions of lives because of it. And so we simultaneously, whenever we think about whenever we think about 9/11, we simultaneously have to think about the pain that was inflicted on us, but then the pain that we inflicted because of that. Or, more precisely, the pain that we inflicted in the name of 9/11, but really based on plans that the neoconservatives had all along. And I get why people see America as an evil nation. Yeah, I get it. No doubt. No argument except the right argument, which is state power in general. Let me start here. My friend Eugene Puryear over at By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik. Congratulations, first of all, on going and expanding to 2 hours. You guys give him some love, show him some love on Twitter, say congratulations and all that good stuff. But Eugene said something to me many, many months ago when we first started our friendship on Twitter, and he first invited me on my show. And Eugene, I owe you at least 20 appearances on my show. But I digress. One of the first things Eugene said to me was that he, in general, opposes the state, government, right? I don't know if I can quite call him an anarchist because he has not made that clear, but he opposes that overarching authority. And in the context of our conversation, if I remember correctly, and Eugene, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but in the context of our conversation, as I remember it, it was based on the necessary evils that governments have to carry out in order to maintain that grip on authority. In other words, for a government to be a government, it's going to, by definition, carry out domestic and international atrocities. That's what governments do. That's just the nature. That's why the part of America's belligerence on the international stage is not the mere fact that they want to be evil. Like, I think this is where I disagree the most with some progressives, because they view America through the simplistic lens of the villain with the windy mustache, the long windy mustache, just and they view America's imperialism through this overly simplistic view that we intellectually know better than to apply to one of our foreign adversaries. We know intellectually that we will not look at North Korea through an overly simplistic lens of they are just evil. Yet some of my friends, and I love every single one of you, but some of you looked at America through the same simplistic lens that you deride or you dismiss neoconservatives looking on the foreign stage. You will not allow American foreign policy to be dictated by overly simplistic views of the motives of men, and dismissing those motives are imbuing nefarious connotations on those motives in the sense of almost a caricature, a villain, a cartoon character with a long mustache, and they are just evil for the sake of being evil. We know better than to apply that to our foreign adversaries. Yet some of you do that to America. And I'm stuck in a quagmire. Maybe one day, maybe years from now, I'll look back at this episode and say, Ben was just a kid at 37. He had to grow up. Just like he was a kid at 21. He had to grow up. I didn't know anything when I was 37. I'm just an idiot at 37. Just a guy who could not let go of that last residual of patriotism and nationalism because of what he experienced on 9/11 and not knowing if his brother was alive. But eventually he'll grow out of it and realize that America is just this villain, this cartoon character villain with the long mustache that laughs at it and seizes every opportunity to be the monster on the international stage. But something tells me that life is a little more complicated than that. Something tells me that foreign policy is a little more complicated than that. Education, studying it for years actually tells me that. But just emotionally and just common sense tells me that. But in terms of you, my friends who are listening, who may be the anarchist or who may be anti-America or particularly anti-American imperialism, some of you do apply that lens towards America, that America is just evil. But that's where I draw the line, because it does us no good to create this moral judgment of America and just say America is simply evil, because that doesn't give us any insight into why America does what it does. It creates a moral judgment of America that does not give us insight into the machinations that is American foreign policy. I think I've had the right combination of Cavassier tonight. Maybe that's why I'm talking like this. But what I mean by that is simply this: once you stop your analysis at America is just evil, then you're giving America an excuse. And you don't really have a formula to change our foreign policy that ultimately led to the funding of Osama bin Laden against Russia in Afghanistan in the 80s. You don't really understand why we did it except to say, oh, we're just evil. And that's too overly simplistic. We don't apply that to North Korea. Why the hell would we apply that to the United States? So the question is, why does America, this anthropomorphized, you thought I lost my point. I knew what I'm coming full circle, people. Stick with me. I'll take you places. Why would this this anthropomorphized America allow Saudi Arabia to stab us in the back and drive the knife even, and we, America, drives the knife even deeper into our back, fully embracing Saudi Arabia, knowing full and damn well that the person who has the knife in our back is Saudi Arabia, but yet and still, every president, every part of America excuses Saudi Arabia, and to this day, 16 years later. What is it about our foreign policy that allows us or forces us to do this? And this is where I do become overly simplistic, because I don't know if I've asked the question yet. But here's the oversimplified answer. One, we need to maintain our access to their oil reserves and to their oil production capacity, because our American machine does not operate without that oil. And I know America is producing more oil now than ever before, but we still need that supply from Saudi Arabia. And our purchase and our acquiring of oil from Saudi Arabia maintains a certain balance in the region. And we prefer that balance because you prefer the devil you know than the devil that you have yet to get in bed with. I said that very intentionally because think about it. If we could get what we needed from Iran, we would be in bed with Iran and Iran would be in bed with us. So oil and the need for oil to drive our entire machine, both our economic machine and our militaristic machine. And then capitalism in general, right? We're willing to pit anything. We would use Lucifer himself. We would deploy the hounds of hell to oppose communism. Because somewhere in the psyche of America, capitalism is so important that, like I said on the show many times before, or many shows before, we'd wage nuclear war. Because capitalism, free markets, or what we call free markets, but not really free, that's at the top of our national security interest, our vital national interest. We would go to war to protect capitalism. We go to total war to protect capitalism. So for those two reasons, we are willing to embrace a nation like Saudi Arabia, despite knowing that they alone are probably the most responsible. Why are they responsible? I mean, I can't dismiss Saudi Arabia as just being evil because I would be betraying the very thing I'm asking you not to do with America. Saudi Arabia is split. I can't go into great detail now only because I don't know that my mental faculties are sharp enough right now to discuss the division in the kingdom between the ruling government and the Wahhabism sect that controls another portion of the government. And I don't really don't have the details in my head outlined the way I would like to. But I would say the power of religion, yeah. But more importantly, the power of theocracy and the influence that religion can have on government. And so no matter what they do with the United States, they're willing to embrace the United States as far and as long and as wide as they possibly can. But at the end of the day, no matter how much money we give them, no matter how rich we make them, we're infidels. Shit, not only are we infidels, but we're damn it Babylon. We are the great whore. And they are willing to embrace us and love us and give us and, ostensibly love us and give us everything that we want. But at the end of the day, their fundamentalism transcends or trumps everything else. And so at the end of the day, if they had a decision between letting us live and to kill us, they would kill us. And this is not an overly simplified view of Islam as a whole, but this is most certainly a very sober and realistic look at Wahhabism and the fundamentalist nature of it and the way it drives Al-Qaeda and the way it's driven ISIS. So anyway, I've gone on long enough. That's why I don't like to talk about 9/11. It is convergence of so many things. And on top of all the political convergences, what is the correct, type it in the chat box in the comment section. Despite all of the convergence, there you go. I'll rearrange my sentence. Despite all of the convergence of all of the political implications and contradictions and on top of all that is the emotional connection of the pain that our fellow Americans felt. And I say fellow Americans because, hey, I'm an American. I am. And I don't say that, as James Baldwin said, I don't say that necessarily out of any sense of pride. I say that out of the fact that this is the only home I have. This is the only place, not the only place that I know, but the only place that I have. I have Africans who reject me. where I would try to create a connection or a bond. There are nations that would reject me. People who look more like me than the average American would reject me. America is not only is America my home in terms of my identity, but America is my only home in the sense that generations of my family's bones, just as James Baldwin said, are buried here as far back as I can even go. I did Ancestry.com, and I could only go back 5 generations. And then my ancestry line falls off. That's it. I can't go back any further than that. But I know that they were here because they were there. I know that they were here during slavery because we don't have. I mean, this is the only home I know through force. And it is what it is at this point. I'm not going to reject the only home that I know. I almost want to say, where the fuck are you going to go, people? The international stage is the Wild West. It is the Wild. Maybe you can go to Canada. Maybe you can go to Mexico. Maybe you can go to the UK. But you're still going to a Western civilization. You're still going to a nation that has been fundamentally shaped by America, particularly since post-World War II. Right? And so ultimately, where are we going to go? This is our home. And at some point in your life, you realize, God damn it, I'm stuck with the family that I'm stuck with. Dysfunctional and all. Problematic and all. Baggage and all. But it's easy to fall into the overly simplistic view, and sometimes it's just the right view. I may criticize my family. I may attack my family. I may call my family out. I may criticize America. I may attack America. I may call America out. But nobody else can. And this is, I know. You listening to me, some of you agree with me. Others of you like, oh, that damn Ben Dixon I knew he wasn't a revolutionary. Well, shit. I mean, how long have you been listening to me? I'm a revolutionary in the sense that I absolutely agree with the diagnosis. I just don't agree with the policy solution. I'm not waiting for the proletariat revolution to get something better in my lifetime. And I can't finish this next sentence without having going into a full-blown international theories discussion, so I'm just going to cut it here, and this is what I will say. I will say this. 9/11 is difficult because of the collision of emotions of what America is, what America was, what America did, but still the fact that we are Americans. And I would, personally, just me, I would rather grapple with that collision of cognitive dissonances than to overly simplify America and just say America's evil. Because I'm idealistic enough to believe that the solution is in the gray. The solution is never in the black and the white. The fact that America's evil, if we just get rid of America, that everything will be okay. Yes, folks, that's the circles I run in. Those are what some of my friends say. Thankfully, I'm in the circles, and they generally like me enough to hear me out from time to time. Eventually, some of them will say I'm kind of, I'm COINTELPRO. Some of them will say that. But at least they will hear me as I say this. Good night. That's all I'm going to say. Good night.